Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay? Yep, great. Welcome to our afternoon session, Reducing Time to Value through Salesforce DevOps. Quick introductions. My name is Albert James. I'm the Chief Architect and the Technical Capability Lead for Australia and New Zealand Salesforce practice at Capgemini. And I'm accompanied here today by Gareth John, who's an Engagement Director with us, and also Bernard Wong, who's a Lead Solution Architect. Before we get started, I'm just going to tell a quick personal story. The image that you're all looking at here is an image of trail running. It's very much aligned with the whole trail concept. We're all trailblazers. But there's a little more meaning, personal meaning for me behind this. First of all, sorry to disappoint, that is not me. But I do enjoy trail running. I couldn't run a kilometer if my life depended on it about 5 years ago. But something sort of inside me, just one day, I just decided to pull a Forrest Gump and start running. And the next year, I completed the Blackmores Sydney Marathon. The next year, I did it again a little bit quicker, and then I got into trail running. I like this image in particular because I think what we're doing here with DX and DevOps is very much like trail running. It's like walking, but you get there a lot faster. It requires a specific set of tools, best practices, principles, and a certain state of mind in order to succeed. As you can see, this person's taking what I call a leap of faith. If everybody leaves this session and you go off and you implement DevOps and DX, at the end of the whole thing, one day, you're going to have to deploy from version control, which will be your new source of truth, into your production org. And that requires a leap of faith, because you're going to ask yourselves the question, how do I know what's in my source control is really what I want to put in my production org? Because a lot of people, prior to making that move, production is their source of truth. So there's a number of things. If we've got the right processes, the right tools, the right best practices in place, and the right principles behind it, we can have confidence and we can take that leap of faith, knowing that we're going to have the outcomes that we need. The structure today, first of all, Gareth is going to talk a little bit about the why in true consulting style. I'm then going to talk a little bit about the what, and Bernard is going to walk us through how and give us a live demo of how we actually do this. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Gareth.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to start with how we got started. And really early on in the journey, we had to challenge ourselves in the way that we think, where we needed to ask a very simple question. Did we have clear understanding of how long it took our developers to check in their code and clear understanding of being realized as to was it successful? It was a really hard question to ask ourselves because we had no metrics that said, once we checked in code, when was the point in time we knew that it was successful and it integrated in the right manner? A good analogy, or a good way of thinking of that today is around, if we've got two developers working on two different feature teams, both working on code at the same time, they both test it in their own box and they're successful, and then they go on with their next piece of code. The challenge is 4 or 6 weeks later when we move to an integrated environment and it fails almost on the first test. So the challenge we wanted to resolve was, how do we resolve that slow feedback loop? How do we know in real time that our code was successful, our development or configuration task was successful? And how do we resolve the uncertainty of the business? How can we ensure that we have business confidence to be successful and that they can trust us as a development team or a project team to deliver the right benefits at the right time and their customers will achieve success? So to do this, we came up and we had really 4 key business benefits that we achieved through this engagement. The first one was around time to market. So this is the ability for us to deliver our business value regularly, when the business want it, aligned to their goals and aspirations, and in a manner that our customers expect. So it's really critical, and we delivered this through, obviously, our automation, with primarily around development of builds, testing and deploy, end-to-end through automation, through our Salesforce and DevOps. Underpinned this was our release train cycle, and this is where we had predictability, fast and reliable services, really delivering it in an efficient way. Risk is our second item, and risk is really about the business being able to understand a known quantity. So the business being able to understand when they're getting it, what level of quality they're going to get it, and what does that risk profile look as a result. So with automation, we see that we are providing business with agility, reliability, and the security that their product that we're delivering will work the first time and meet their business goals and their overall aspirations to their customers. We are doing this through, or we did this through feature-based delivery, and that's all about delivering small, packaged up services in a controlled way, meeting our security and meeting our reliability to the customer. Lower costs is a primary driver from a business point of view. It's how we stack up our business case. And with Salesforce and DevOps, it's one of our underpinning business benefits. I'm sure if you knew the costs, you'd understand that we're realizing our return on investment within about a year, which is a great achievement. The lowering of the costs is primarily centered around closing out that feedback cycle. So the ability to influence at the development stage rather than influencing at a testing stage, which in turn increases our productivity. So if our developers are checking in code, having it tested, providing them a notification, updating the code, we've got that continual process happening, and they're not waiting an extended duration to actually understand if there was a problem or not a problem and what other problems have resulted. So really, the lowering the cost is all about productivity and making sure our teams are delivering the required velocity and meeting our business expectations. Improving business confidence. The best way to improve confidence, deliver a high quality product and deliver it on time and on budget. And with Salesforce and DevOps, it really underpins restoring or improving our business confidence if some of you are feeling that pain right now. A lot of that is driven by the service being predictable, the service being known, the service being secure, and it being controlled in a way that's repeatable and understood by everyone on the engagement. The key item around business confidence is really about no fear. In a non-automated way, the business has lots of fear. In an automated way, it's that conversion to a no fear and a trusting of the process. So what were some of the practical benefits that we gained from this project and that we've seen on our other clients? If I was to ask everyone to put their hand up, I'm sure everyone would, but one of the quick questions I would ask is, how often do you actually complete a code review in a manual environment? And I think we'll all talk about the challenges of time, priorities, and lots of other items. But automation of code reviews provides you the security that you need to ensure that you're delivering a high quality product and that you can influence it at the beginning of the engagement rather downstream when you get into a testing environment. Traceability is all about the who, the when, and the why. End-to-end audit of who's making changes, when they're making changes, why they made it, being able to go back and report against that. The ability to educate our team when they've made mistakes so they can learn and we can have continuous improvement across the development team, all feeds into improved traceability. Easily controlled change. I remember code freezes. I think everyone's probably heard of a code freeze where you down tools for a period of time and no one makes any changes. That doesn't happen anymore. In a DevOps world, you don't need to do that. We pick up the code that's been checked in and that moves forward. So not having to sell to the business that there's a code freeze is a real added advantage. It also, I'll just add as well, it also provides you the flexibility from a change control point of view as to what do you want to deploy and when do you want to deploy it. So we can have development running simultaneously, and when we align it to business initiatives and business priorities and what our customers in the marketplace are looking for, then we can package up these changes, build a release and deploy it. Predictability. I like to think of being predictable as a little bit like the movie Groundhog Day. So some of you may have seen Groundhog Day with Bill Murray. And essentially, day one, Bill Murray lives out his day. Day two, he repeats it. And he kind of realizes that he's living the same story as yesterday. Day three, makes some refinements. And really, a week to 10 days later, he knows everything that's going to happen and he's he's missing potholes, and he's fully aware of what's happening, and that's predictability. And with DevOps and Salesforce and DevOps, that's what you get. That's the key moment. The process you follow at the development stage all the way up to your pathway to production is the same process. It's consistent. Parallel projects. I think a lot of us would say that running parallel projects on multiple tracks with different go-live dates, with different code bases, is really hard. Without automation, I think it's a nightmare for the release team. So with Salesforce and DevOps, you obviously have code mergers, and you have all the tooling to underpin it all, which supports it. So there's no more conversations with our clients that says, here's our 12-month roadmap, we can only support these projects. Because we can support all the projects in parallel and meet the different timelines, provided you've got the right pipelines in place. Overrating changes. Some of this has been covered before, but really this is all about productivity. Removing that waste, removing the manual handoffs, and leading to a real seamless experience for our developers and right through the project into the business. And the last one is about developer accountability. Albert used a lot in the early stages of our project, used the analogy about when you're at home and you're in the kitchen and you're cooking a meal with your partner or a family member or your housemate. And if I'm the cook for the night, I will use lots of pots, make a lot of mess, splashback is covered in pasta sauce. We eat the meal and I walk away. And the cleaner, my wife, has to pick it up and clean it all. And really what we're talking about here is about developer culture and being responsible for what they're actually doing, and being aware that what they're doing impacts. So with the culture, it's quite seamless. There is no more release team, so it's all on the developer. Okay, so here are some realized benefits we achieved with our client. A bit of scene setting. They are a service cloud business. They are heavy in communities. They are heavy in Lightning, so real strong UX presence. And they had a fair amount of customization. Their org size, about 5,000 components. There were approximately 30 developers all working in parallel. 5 different streams and over 5 SIs engaged as well. So you can understand the complexity we were in before we transitioned to the new world of Salesforce and DX. Some of the benefits. So to create a sandbox used to take us 4 hours. After DevOps, this is a little hard to read. It took 3 minutes. So if I was holding a mic, I'd probably drop it right now because that's a big gap. So was 4 minutes, now it's 3 minutes.
4 hours.
We had 450 pre and post deployment steps. So when I'm coming back to development culture, that culture just to add in a manual step for a release team to manage was pretty much removed. So we went from 450 steps down to 3 with Salesforce DevOps. When we went to production, it took us 5 hours, and that didn't include any verification from the business to understand was it successful. With Salesforce DevOps, it's 1 hour. So we've shaved quite a bit of time there. For non-production deployments, we were doing 1 a day across multiple projects. If we said to the release team, hey, we need to do another deployment to another sandbox, they almost walked out of the room. They were fed up with it. So we went from 1 a day to unlimited. It's really infinity. And as Albert will mention, it's configured to whichever way you want to operate from a business point of view and how agile you actually are within your organization. From a headcount point of view, we started out with a release team. We had 5 full-time release members, and now it's down to a 0.5. And it's really an engineer managing the service rather than people spinning up and deploying sandboxes and executing release activities. So the kicker at the bottom is really about, over the course of a 3-month project, a typical project where you may have 2 months of development, a month of end-to-end testing and client UAT, there's approximately 500 hours saved just from a 3-month engagement. It's quite remarkable, to be honest. So So yeah, I think that's it for me. So I might just hand over to Albert just to talk about the what.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Gareth, for talking us through the sort of the why. We wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor of the real benefits that can be realized through doing this before we get into too much detail about what it actually is. So now I'm going to talk about the what. What is DevOps? I love this picture. Everything's all nice and calm. Downstairs, we've got a dashboard. We can see what our airspeed is, altitude, all these things, and everything's all nice and peaceful down below. And when DevOps is running nicely, that's what it should look like. So before we get into it, I just want to demystify and define a few terms and talk a little bit about best practices and principles that are behind each of these. I'm going to explain when I say DevOps, what do I mean? And Salesforce DX, what is that? How does that fit into the big picture? I'm going to talk about source control management, and I'm going to talk about CI/CD. I'm not going to go into depth in testing, collaboration, and several other areas that are really important in DevOps. With 40 minutes, we don't have time to go into all of the different aspects of it. I'm going to focus on these four. First of all, when I say DevOps, what do I mean? Well, first of all, DevOps is not a piece of software that you can go out and buy or a tool that you can install. First and foremost, it's the mindset that we have at the epicenter of development, operations, and quality assurance. It's founded on some key principles that we have to adopt. The first three you might recognize from Agile and Scrum, and that's to be iterative, incremental, and to be continuous, to keep doing things, to get a little better each time. The fourth one is maybe a little bit of a surprise to some people. It's self-service. Now, I'm not talking about end users, your end customers, self-service. I'm talking about internal staff, developers being able to spin up their own scratch org when they need one, being able to create a branch when they need it, project managers being able to go and take a look at a Jira dashboard to find out exactly where all their issues and their stories are and exactly where does the project stand at the moment. Really, anybody on the team being able to self-service themselves and get the immediate up-to-date information that they need instead of emailing around spreadsheets and doing all that kind of stuff. That just doesn't really work in a DevOps environment. It's about being collaborative and building in collaboration to the tool sets that we use instead of using email and chat external from all of the tools that we're using. It's about being integrated so that when a developer checks in a piece of code, that the unit tests go off and automatically run so that everything that needs to happen just happens. And it's about being automated. One of the challenges that we've run into with manual releases is the manual effort that developers have to do. There's no developer that I've ever met that said to me, Albert, please put me on a release team where I'm going to spend 4 hours doing the same thing over and over again every day, every time we do a release. It's actually a big retention problem. Nobody really wants to be in that role. So when we automate those things, we can have developers do what they really want to do, which is develop. So those are what I would say are the key principles behind DevOps mindset. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about DX and how does that fit into it. So first of all, Salesforce DX is a new method of packaging metadata. Previously, we used metadata format, and with DX we introduced source format. If you imagine configuring a Salesforce application, behind the scenes there's a whole bunch of files. With the previous metadata format, we had fewer large files. And when you change something in one of those files would change. And they might get written in different ways, reordered. If you were to use a piece of software to try to merge those changes, it would be really hard to do because you'd be looking at this massive file where there's all kinds of different changes, but really only one that matters. And finding that one is like finding a needle in a haystack. With source format, it's different. We have a lot of smaller files. And so when I change something, it changes in one specific place. So if I've got 5 parallel development streams going on at the same time, and all 5 need to touch the same thing, it's very easy for me to identify who's changed what. And a lot of that merging can actually be done automatically with the source format, where it could not be done automatically with metadata format. It's a new and improved tooling, which includes scratch orgs, which are personal development environments. Again, going back to the automated principle, when a developer comes in on a day and picks up a Jira ticket to do a piece of work, within 4 minutes, they can create a branch, they can spin up a scratch org, deploy that scratch org, and start doing their job. We don't have to wait for things. They can manage their own scratch org. It's a powerful command line. Now, I know a lot of people don't like the command line. I might not look old, but I did grow up with the command line some time ago, so I'm very familiar and comfortable with it. And I know not everybody is, but I would say if you're not comfortable with the command line, spend a little bit of time with it. One of the things Bernard's going to show you is something on a command line that takes a couple of keystrokes that would otherwise take you 30 minutes of clicking to do the same thing. It's really powerful, and it's worth spending a little bit of time learning if you're not comfortable with it yet. And I say even functional people, it's not just developers that benefit from the command line. Functional analysts, other roles can benefit from it too. Yes, it's technical, but it can be learned. And it will make you a much more valuable resource in the community. It's also about different kinds of export. When we set up a Scratch org, it's not very useful. Brand new, no data, no test data, no accounts, no contacts, none of that stuff. We've got a new method of importing data. I can export data now from one place, save it as a JSON file, and build that into my Scratch org deployment. So that when I deploy a Scratch org, I've automatically got some accounts, some contacts, some test data that I can use to do my development. That's all just natively in the process now. And then, like I said earlier, easy merges. Some best practices here. First of all, as I mentioned right at the beginning, version control will be your new source of truth, not production anymore. We have to have the confidence that when we deploy from version control to production, that we're deploying the right thing. And it's important to establish that as the source of truth. Second thing, artifact-based development. DX introduces the ability to manage things as artifacts instead of big orgs. Previously, at large customers, I might have 5,000 components, all one single org. Much better than that is to separate them into artifacts and create little reusable artifacts and compose an application together of those things. So that's one of our best practices that we recommend. Scripting all the manual steps, I think that one kind of speaks for itself. Empowering developers, removing the release team capacity and letting them do what they do best and develop. And lastly, integrating with issue management is a best practice. When something, integrating the issue management system with Salesforce DX allows us to keep finer grained control into what's going on, what's been changed, and then seeing what was a result of a change. Now I'll talk a little bit about source control management. There's some examples down the bottom there of different source control managements that we see in use at different customers. The benefits, obviously, as Gareth already said, are complete change traceability. Who made this change? When did they make it? Why did they make it? And see what branches did that go into. It got deployed over here to SIT. That same change went to UAT on this date, and it went to production on that date. Branching structure. This is what allows us to have multiple projects and multiple parallel streams of activity going on in the same time. And the next slide will go into a little bit more detail on that. Improved code quality. This is a really important one. With the previous way of doing things, especially with metadata format, we didn't always catch every change that went into a system. A developer could log into a lower environment, they could change something, and that change might accidentally make its way up to the higher regions. Once we introduce source control management, that doesn't happen anymore. We can put in pull requests so that every change has to be reviewed by a tech lead, for example, and no changes can sneak in. Automatic merges. A lot of times when we've got multiple teams working on things, maybe it's a hotfix that went into production that now needs to come back down into a monthly release stream or a development stream. Those things can be completely automated now. The version control system can sort most of those out, especially when we have source format. A lot of them can be handled without any manual effort whatsoever. History tracking and concurrent release train. That's being able to schedule releases in advance and to target specific features and capabilities going into specific releases that are coming up. Best practices, commit with reasons. I've seen a number of people put version control in, but not require developers to put reasons in when they commit changes. We have to put reasons in, otherwise it's hard to tell the why. Why did I make this change? Whether it's a Jira ticket or it's a GitHub ticket number or whatever we're using for issue management, when I commit a change, I put the reasons in there why I commit the change. Use a unique point of entry. I just talked about that a minute ago. That's where the only way to get a change in is to go through this stream. There's no other way to get a change into production. That gives me traceability. And we use pull requests generally for that sort of thing. To make commits accountable from a developer. I had this slide originally saying commit often. The problem with commit often is sometimes people do it too often. You really want to commit when you're ready. You've done all the work that you need to do. You've run your unit test. You've got it. You're happy with it. Now you commit it off to the feature branch, and then it goes up the stream. Access control, and lastly, linking with issue management. And then now I'll talk a little bit about continuous integration, deployment, and delivery. So again, we've already talked about reduced manual effort. As a developer, I make a change, I commit it, it just flows through, gets deployed automatically to maybe a system test environment or an SIT environment or a post-playback environment. Automatic deployments, automatic code integration. Useful things, right? Easily increasing the number of environments. Just not too long ago, I had a customer come to me and say, hey, Albert, I love the playbacks, but I'd like to have a sandbox where I can play after a playback and just kind of log in and do some stuff and try it out. Imagine if we didn't have this, we'd have to allocate somebody from a release team to spend 4 hours every time we make a change that I need to go into that post-playback environment. Huge manual effort. And so we really try to reduce the number of environments. But with this mindset, we can have as many as we want. It just takes 15, 20 minutes of the release engineer's time to set up a new destination, create a sandbox, set up a new destination, and put in some code to make it deploy every time somebody checks it in. That way we can give our customers a post-playback environment. And then finally, integrated code scans. Again, when a developer checks in a piece of code, we can automate a lot of code scans. We can automate unit tests. We can automate static code analyzers. We can even automate some web-based code analyzers. Finally, best practices. For large enterprises, you may want to be platform agnostic. You might have many different technologies that you need to do CI/CD for. Why should you use one for this technology, one for that technology, and one for something else, especially when one release might have pieces from all 3 different technologies? So you choose a single CI/CD platform, and you can then deploy Salesforce things to it. You can deploy other technologies, Java, .NET, SAP, Oracle, whatever. So smaller companies may not have that problem. You might prefer to have a Salesforce-specific CI/CD engine, which is fine. Integrated automatic testing, integrated code scanning. Again, we already talked about these are best practices. They become capabilities. Once we put this in place, we might as well use them. Finally, repeatable processes and to measure productivity. You know, measuring productivity maybe deserves just a minute because without this, we can't measure individual developer productivity. I've had a number of times where we put this in and we can then look at specific developers and say, you know, this particular developer maybe has a lot of problems with test class failures, or maybe their coverage is a little low, or maybe they keep making the same kind of mistakes. So I can then offer them education and help them be better. Once we can measure this, we can improve it. And so to measure productivity, I think, is a really important outcome from this. And then lastly, with all of these things together, what do we have? We have a new mindset. It's a different way of thinking. We've got a shift towards reusable artifacts. We've got smaller and more frequent releases. We've got release automation. And we've got developer empowerment. Again, you know, you cook, I'll clean. Then people don't think twice about using the food processor or the blender or all these things that are really hard to clean. And then these tie back to the business benefits with which Gareth has already outlined. So now I'll talk a little bit about how do we lay that out? What does that look like in terms of a branching structure and sort of a day in the life of a developer? So here on the left, we have a developer who's using a DX scratch org. They come in the morning, they look in Jira, they see a new task, a new feature needs to be developed. They spin up a feature branch, they spin up a scratch org. In the first 4 minutes of their day, basically what they've done is create a branch, create a scratch org, and deploy to that scratch org. Now they've got an environment where they can start doing their real job, their actual work. They might log into the scratch org, do some config things. They might go into their editor, change some code, write a few test classes. Eventually, they get to a point where they say they're done, everything works, and they want to commit it. So they then commit that back up to the feature branch, and once it's ready, they submit a pull request to move that back up to the dev branch. Now, the dev branch you can use for a number of different things in a number of different ways. I like to think of that as a stream of activity. We might have multiple parallel streams. They might be aligned to your lines of business or business units, or if you have many different applications within a single Salesforce org, maybe that's how the streams are laid out. But a stream then is just a group of developers that are all working on common things. You might use it for squads if you use a squad approach. So that feature gets pull requested up to the dev branch. It goes through the necessary steps that happen on a pull request, and then automatically gets deployed out to a system test or a functional test environment. That's it. It's pretty simple. From there, once it's ready, it gets moved into the release branch. It goes through release testing and then gets pushed out to production. Let's make it a bit more complex now. So now we have n number of developers, but the process is very much the same. They're all doing the same kinds of things. They come in, they pick up a task, a ticket, they work on it, they commit their code back, and they push that up to a stream. We can now introduce different streams as well. Maybe I've got 10 developers, 5 of them working in sort of stream A, another 5 working in stream B on a completely different set of deliverables that may or may not go into the same release or a different release. But very, very much the same sort of setup there. And then lastly, we add in a BAU team. Once we've got something into production to support, we need to support it, right? So we have a team of people there, again, using very much the same model, creating hotfix branches instead of feature branches, making fixes and pushing them out to the master branch. If it's a P1 or if it's not a P1, we might set up another stream for them, a BAU stream, let's call it DevC, where they put all their fixes in at the end of the month, they go out into the release and then production. So how did we start this? How did we start this journey? Well, first of all, select and learn the tooling. Even an old man like me one day sat down and said, I want to see what VS Code looks like. So I clicked install, next, done, and started using VS Code. I did the same thing for version control, GitHub, all those different tooling. I got familiar with those, I got comfortable with those. The next thing I did, and I needed help with this part, was to get everything into a format that I could load it into a scratch org. The first time I tried that, I got about 9,000 errors. I got some help from Bernard and some other people, and eventually we got it down to 5,000, 3,000, 1,500, 20. The last 20 were really hard. And then finally one day, Bernard had a breakthrough moment where he just got up from his desk and walked away like this, because it was done. And we had everything deployed successfully to a scratch org. That was a great day. The next step is optional. You might want to segregate your code. If you have like a really large org with a lot of components in it, you might want to start breaking it down into different artifacts. This is a great moment to sort of let your inner Marie Kondo come out if you want to do some tidying up. Every component that you touch, every line of code that you touch, you might ask yourself, does it spark joy? And if not, delete it or refactor it. But eventually, when you're done with that exercise, you have then a number of segments, and you can check those in and version control them separately. Next is a continuous integration. We set up CI/CD so that I can have things automatically deploy off to different environments. I can have processes run when developers check things in, etc. And then lastly, like I said, is that leap of faith. Once we've got everything done, everything's in version control, I'm ready to go. Eventually, I have to deploy. And that requires me to take what I've got in version control and push it out to production. If we've done everything well, we've got the best practices, we've got the principles in place, we'll have a good result. Last, before we get on to the demo, and I have to go through this pretty quickly, is a maturity model. When we look across all of the different aspects of DevOps, DX, CI/CD, testing, QA, all these different areas, we can sort of put levels on them. And we go from level 1 through level 5. Level 1 is basic. It really means no DevOps, but we don't want to say no DevOps because we all have to start somewhere. So really at level 1, what we see is that there's no version control, or if there is, it's metadata format version control. We've got a lot of manual steps, a lot of manual reviews, and a little bit of luck when it comes to code quality, because again, things can slip in. We've used email and instant message for collaboration. We're fully manual with CI/CD. Deployment frequency is as inoften as possible because it's very time consuming, and fully manual test automation. Level 2 improves on that. It builds upon that. We've now got version control in source format. We've got manual reviews on pull requests. We've got an issue management system where we can do some collaboration. And we've got the rest of all of those things. Level 3, we've got a release branch, hotfix branches. We've got a little bit more sophisticated branching strategy. We do unit tests on commit. We've got version control and messaging for collaboration. Again, we're doing collaboration in those tools. We've got continuous deployment to non-production environments. We've got deployment frequency is automatic for unmanaged environments. That might happen very often. For production, again, it's still manual. And then automated unit testing, but not integrated yet to the process. At level 4, we've got feature branches now. So we're introducing feature branches from a version control. We've got code scanning on commit as well, and we've got all the rest of that stuff. And then finally, top level, I call this the nirvana level, right? It's where we really all want to be, but it's expensive to get to. And not all companies need to get there. For some companies, level 3 might be perfectly adequate. For some, 4 might be adequate. If you've got a large enterprise org and it's costing you a lot of manual time to do all these things, then maybe you make the investment and you go for level 5. But that's, again, where we sort of want to be for those larger companies. So I've got to hand it over to Bernard now for demo. I'm going to let Bernard get set up for the demo. But in a nutshell, we're going to demo a couple of simple things. We do have a limited amount of time. We've got a big demo. So we're only going to show a few parts of it. And if anybody wants to see more, feel free to come see us afterwards. And we've also got it set up at our booth, and we'd be happy to walk anybody through it on a one-by-one basis if you'd like to come up afterwards and see it.
Yeah. Thank you, Albert, for summarizing nicely what it looks like a developer So we're limited with time, so we're just going to move on to the demo quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we drive efficiency using DevOps with just using Salesforce DX and a CI/CD pipeline. So here I've got my Scratch org open already. I'm just going to make a small change and show you how we commit the change into the repository. And so I'm just going to upload a logo, for instance, and make the change. So that's saved now in my Scratch org. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly pull that into my local repository just by using a simple command from DX. So the pull request, that's not a pull request, that's just a pull. It's similar to, if you used to GitHub as well, there's similar to a git pull, git push. It works the same way for DX, right? So that brings up my changes to my local. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to push it to the remote Git repository. So here we're going to try to use some best practices. We're going to put some issue number, XXX, update, logo. Yeah, we're going to do that. That gets committed. Then we're going to do a git push. And so my changes now will get pushed to the cloud. And from there, we're going to use a pull request to promote the change. You can see my changes already there in the cloud. And we're going to create a pull request. So for those who don't know what a pull request is just a feature, a nice feature to collaborate between your team, just for requesting, for instance, code reviews. That's a nice way of doing it. And as you can see here, this triggered CI/CD pipeline, and we can see the build has already started. If you want to see the details, but if I jump into, this would be my sandbox. Hopefully that's going to kick off soon. So it's all about transparency. We can log everything. The developer has control on what's happening and where it would point of failure. He is just building the CLI to install and building the package. And in a few seconds, we're going to see the changes getting pushed into my sandbox. Hopefully, yeah. So note this happens very quickly, and 2 o'clock. That's today. Here we go. So as you can see, the deployment has started, and all that is done under 5 minutes. If you want to see more, come and see us at our booth. Right there in the corner. Thank you.
So I'm afraid we didn't leave a whole lot of time for questions. I think we have about half a minute left. But if we don't have any more time for questions, like I said, we'll be over at our Capgemini booth, which is just over the left, and we will stay here for a few minutes afterwards. And happy to chat to anybody about any questions that you have. Thank you very much.